All right, we're back. It's been a minute, but I wanted to bring on Tay again to talk about the brewing Christian revival. Evidently, of course, Charlie Kirk was assassinated just a couple of weeks ago, and that was something that really rocked the nation. And then just this past weekend, we had his funeral service, which was viewed by literally tens of millions of Americans. You had some of the highest officials of our land represented there, where the gospel was preached, where there was hours of really powerful worship, and where, of course, Erica Kirk gave her stunning speech in which she put her Christian faith into practice and forgave the shooter. And that was met online with tons of just amazement at the scope and scale of what was happening before our eyes and Charlie's legacy, and just the putting. It was so evident, just like the putting of the Christian faith into practice. And my take on that whole service was it really did seem like Christianity and its practice, and just the testimony of what it is, put Trump in the backseat, put MAGA in the backseat, and it really wasn't about just the politics. It wasn't about Charlie's view of politics or any of that. Really, it wasn't even about the president of the United States who was there. I didn't see hardly any clips of his speech except his self-deprecating joke that he made about not being able to love his enemies the way Charlie did. But that was overshadowed. Trump was overshadowed by the Christian faith in practice. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. But of course, social media is going crazy right now, or has been for the last few days, with Christians saying, wow, we're in the midst of a revival. This is evidence of, a total new chapter. There's new conversations coming up about Christian nationalism, and that people are like saying that's a good thing. I've even seen some atheists and Jewish people saying like, yeah, I want Christian nationalism, which is, I mean, it's a new day. It's the landscape has very much changed in America over the last year with the election of President Trump and now this new assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, it's night and day from where we were a year ago. And what does that all mean for where we're at now? Are we in the midst of a Christian revival? Do we want Christian nationalism? Is that a good thing? That's kind of what I want to explore today. So, Tay, welcome back. And what is the answers to our questions?
Well, man, I think the answer to our questions, it's locked in your head, and that's what I want to try to just extract it
Yeah, and, and
to hear
just
from
to,
you.
for the record, I'm entering this conversation like pretty open-minded about this stuff. I mean, I have certain thoughts, and there's so much
Yep.
nuance of like, what does revival even mean? What does Christian nationalism even mean? Like, depending on what you mean by either of those things, you could have very much different answers and opinions. So I think, this is a layered and nuanced conversation. I don't have like a hard like, yes, it's happening, and no, we don't want Christian or whatever. Like, I think there's a lot to unpack here and a lot to process as Christians and non-Christians in America today.
Yeah, and that I was telling for those of you that are listening, I was telling Taylor before we started recording. I was like, this is the epitome of something that whether Taylor had a YouTube channel or was doing a podcast with Amala or any of that stuff, this is like prime Taylor and Tay getting on a phone call and just like hashing this stuff out. So I do think it's going to have more of that tone to it. So I could easily see things that I say or things that I'm feeling, because this is very much, even for me, an exploratory conversation, just from like, I guess, little echoes and sounds I'm hearing in different corners of X and on YouTube. And it's always so tough, right? Because like the algorithm is going to serve you things that are niched and you're engaging with and you're looking to. So it's hard to actually say how much volume something is really generating. Because obviously, like if 20 people post about something and it shows up in your feed one day, it feels like a lot of people are talking in this direction. But when you zoom out, I mean, it's just 20 people, and so it's hard to get a gauge on that. So I see this for me personally being that kind of an exploratory conversation where, this is just something that I want to get your perspective on, Taylor. And I think we can, bounce back and forth when it comes to trying to shape our minds around it.
Sure.
So I will say for you, because obviously something we've openly talked about is the foundations of how the Christian worldview has shaped Western culture. You and I are both fans of Tom Holland's book Dominion and kind of the thesis he puts forth in that book. And something we have also talked about is, regardless of one's religious ideology or lack thereof, we believe that part of the destruction or the corruption of Western culture, American culture, is even if one does not embrace, adopt, believes in Christianity, for it's one thing to just like not believe in Christianity, but to be able to acknowledge the good that it has brought into our culture and society and what we've benefited from it. And so again, you have someone like a James Lindsay, who's a non-Christian, who can recognize those things. Tom Holland, again, Dominion, who's a non-believer, who can recognize those things. But some of what we've seen, over the past several years is not just going, okay, I'm not a Christian, but I see the good that Christian influence has brought. It's like looking at the Christian influence as a net bad, and Christianity is this horrible thing that's destroying our culture, and it's full of hatred and judgment. And so that's where I really see culture eroding, is whenever you look at the foundations of what gave you the society that you love, and you start to disdain those foundations, and you begin to spit on them, and you begin to, so again, even if you don't want to buy wholesale into the ideology, to just at least recognize the goodness that's come from it. So that being said, for you, do you feel as though, like, with what has happened with Charlie Kirk's assassination, what's happened with the memorial service, do you think that it has shifted the Overton window in the cultural talking point to where people can see and are seeing the goodness of these foundations, these values, these beliefs? Or do you think in the short term, at least right now, that, and again, not in a bad way, but just more observational than, I'm not asking for a judgment on whether this is good or bad, just more of an observation. What do you feel is happening? Or do you feel like it's created a bigger divide in the sense of it's just made people who already hold those things as valuable, it's just made them get emboldened with the desire and the passion to say, hey, I don't need to be silent. I don't need to be ashamed. I can be more vocal. I can be more open in acknowledging why this is the good. And it's made people who thought it was bad just even more antagonistic towards it. And they just go even more into, yeah, this is not good. This is bad. This is, so obviously it's a mixed bag. But do you have a feeling where you at least can generalize? Do you think it's shifted the, cultural Overton window to seeing these things as more of a good? Or do you think it's just made those who already think it's good just say, you know what, like, let me take a stand, let me be bold, let me talk, let me see Charlie as an example. And just in the same way he was perfectly comfortable in voicing his views with policy and faith and integrating them, let me do the same thing. And then it's made people that's looked at it and then they're like, oh, it's even worse. Look how terrible it is. Look how bad, like, it's going in even worse direction. Is my question making sense? Do you have any thoughts as far as that?
Kind of. I think it's either that I would lean more towards the former and say that the former is kind of allowing the latter to happen. But even beyond either one, I think what's happening is reality is just bursting through, and there's been sort of an imposition of a faux reality on us in the last 10, 15 years in the US.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of what happened to Charlie. Was just such a moment where, illusions were shattered about just where we are as a society and where we are as a country. And like, when you have, I tweeted this when it happened, but it's like, I think, so many people had such visceral and strong reactions to Charlie Kirk's death, because his death echoed the Christian story, Christ's story, in which a man, or Jesus, came and was killed by those he was trying to reach, those he was trying to save. He was peaceful. He used his words. He spoke truth, and the world hated him for it and killed him for it. And, I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk is Jesus, but I'm saying he's a follower of Jesus. And I'm saying that his story echoes the ultimate true story that nobody embodies except Christ. And I think that has a deep resonance in American culture and in the Western world, and in humanity at large, because it's what we're made for. But it's the story we're made to see and experience of, like, greater love has no one this, and to lay down his life for his friends. that that is, you know, written into our hearts, and it's also written into our culture over centuries. That it's underlies so much of our mythology and stories, even modern, you know, stories of heroism and stuff like that. It's built on this idea of sacrificial love and you know, truth being the most important thing, and speaking that, and for someone so pure hearted to be, and someone who's so reviled and so slandered and so mischaracterized, to be killed like that, it's just a powerful thing. And you know, there's a lot of conservative Christian commentators out there, but I don't know that any of them really like had the level of integrity and level of like consistently like never putting down his opponents, never belittling people, never like acting inconsistently with Christ-like behavior. I mean, Charlie had strong opinions that people disagreed with. He, you know, had his views on issues that, you know, some Christians who are of a more progressive bent would say aren't very Christ-like. But as far as his like the way he led his life and his family and the way he spoke to people, and like the guy didn't drink, he didn't swear, he didn't, you know, he was very like much you know, just like a stand-up person. And anyway, so I think that just sent shockwaves through the world, because that kind of, you know, like Tertullian said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. He said that in like 300 AD. It's been true of Christianity since the beginning, that like, you know, I tweeted this as well, that like Christianity conquered the Roman Empire, and because Christians suffer well, and because when Christians live out their faith in practice, it bears witness to the world, and it is simply true, and truth bursts through, and like glorious love being the better way, like sacrificial love being the better way, forgiveness being the better way, that shines through, and that transcends politics. It transcends, you know, narratives or you know, agendas or whatever. And I think that, you know, his assassination, which I'm comfortable calling a martyrdom, is something that, you know, just was inherently powerful, and because it echoed that story. And I think that's what burst through, and I think that's why people who are not Christian are moved by it, and are like, you know, I've seen so many posts of people saying like, I was so moved by this and I don't understand why. And I think that that's just testimony to like, not Charlie's perfection, not anything to do with him, but the way it echoes Christ, and the beauty of the gospel, and the beauty of sacrificial love. I think that's really where the power that we're all witnessing and experiencing is. And I think that the new found energy that Christians have to like go and be bold for their faith and do all that is just like out of this, you know, you feel this, and you feel this deep reality, and you don't really understand it, but the only category that you have is just like, okay, I need to do this. I need to be a little more sold out for Jesus. I need to be like Charlie, I need to do whatever, which is all fine and good. But I think it's actually something deeper that's going on, that isn't as obvious, but is, you know, more timeless and more, echoes down to the roots of the true gospel. And of course, within that, there's going to be layers of, you know, misinterpretations and misdirections of that. And that's where you get some of this, like, oh, let's take all this energy and put it in Christian nationalism. Let's put it in MAGA. Let's put it in, you know, political violence against Christians, or political violence against ICE, like we saw just as we're recording this today. Like there's somebody went and shot up an ICE facility. Another, what I've read so far is another radical leftist person who, you know, and that was just a whole, there's so many layers of how things are erupting in our culture right now. So it's definitely like a peak moment where like a lot of things are happening, and it's something to, you know, I'm trying to pay attention and just and be like aware, and not respond like, okay, I'm going to put all my eggs in the basket of MAGA right now because that's where God's moving. You know, I think that's probably the wrong response. But also I see a lot of people turning their noses up and saying, well, this is the rise of Christian nationalism, and it's not right to see Marco Rubio preaching the gospel at a funeral. It's like, bro, like, that's just amazing. I mean, it's just amazing to see the highest officials in the American land like sit there and speak the gospel of Jesus Christ, you know, whether through false motives or pure. It's like, you can rejoice that the gospel is preached, that this beautiful example of forgiveness is being shown to the world. Like that's what I'm here for. I'm so glad it's not, you know, this cheesy hand-wringing Christianity that we've seen in decades past, where like our political leaders are, you know, just doing platitudes, or, you know, kowtowing or not saying what they should, or that our Christian leaders are just browbeating people and moralizing and doing all this stuff. Like, there's so much worse witnesses that America and the world has had than what we just saw of Charlie Kirk in terms of like representing Christianity to culture, representing Christianity to the world. Like, that was amazing. It was a beautiful moment. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. Yeah, there was weird stuff in there. Some of the speakers were wacky, whatever. But like, at the end of the day, the overarching takeaway is like, Christianity shone through in that funeral, and it deeply affected a lot of people, as Christianity always does, as the gospel always does. And I rejoice in that. I don't necessarily think that means we're on the cusp or in the midst of like, a revival. Maybe we can get into whatever that even means right now. But I rejoice that I can see the beauty in the midst of the sorrow, and I can see the beauty in the midst of the tragedy. And God has a way of using those kinds of moments and those kinds of things to, what the enemy meant for evil, he turns around and uses for good. But you still experience the evil, you still experience the darkness. But God does have a way of redeeming that and bringing people to himself through it. And so I rejoice in that. But do I think that that's going to launch us into a momentum of, full born church growth and attendance? I don't know. I don't think, we're too human. Christians are too human, and we're going to fumble. We're going to fumble in so many ways, So I'm just like, let's sit back. Let's, be reflective of this. Let's glorify God. Let's, reflect on Charlie's legacy, and let's pay attention to the moment. Let's, have eyes to see and ears to hear what the Spirit is doing, but let's not like, we always make the mistake to the church historically of like trying to reduce things to the formula, reduce things to like political power, or reduce things to like let's do it this way because this is what works, and let's make it into a package. And like that's the human thing. Let's resist that impulse. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm not saying don't do what the Lord prompts you to do, but that's what you should be doing, is what the Lord prompts you to do, what your faith prompts you to do, what the Holy Spirit's guiding you to do in your personal life, and not necessarily attaching yourself to this movement and thinking that's going to be the thing that carries you into glory and the church into, whatever. So anyway, I've been talking a lot, but curious to hear anything you've got to say in response.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to follow it up with another question, if you don't mind. I mean, look, dude, I think people, hey man, they're here because they would love to hear what you think. Because this is at least setting me up for where, if there was something to throw my hat in, I would like to say. But for you, so I guess in a way, obviously people most deeply impacted by this were, broadly speaking, conservative Christians, like from a direct standpoint. So, you being one, us fitting that category of conservative Christian, however much you like labels, don't like labels, whatever. What do you feel as though and I know this is tough because it's like all this stuff just happened. And so on one level, it's like, look, we got to let this stuff kind of tease out. Like, no one has the answers as far as like what's to come, what should we do, what should we not do. So I think I want to just hear from you, like, now sitting where you are, like, how are you processing this, and what is your response, like, just as Taylor? And I guess from there, if you have a segue into, you're kind of already touching on it, like, speaking to the broader audience, like, hey, let's not like jump to this or jump to that. But I just think for you today, now that, the assassination happened, the memorial service is now taking place, we're, now into this new week. How are you looking at what has taken place, and like, what is your response? What are you like, as someone who ideologically very much fits a lot of this ecosystem? Here's how I'm choosing. And maybe you're not choosing to live any different, right? Maybe it's already consonant and resonant with like the life you were living. And then after you share that, what is your encouragement or just thoughts to the broader Christian community as to like, hey, what I would encourage is more of this. I think where we might be setting ourselves up to mess this up is if we lean more in this direction. Are you tracking with the questions I laid out?
Yeah, so my personal response to this, I made a video on Instagram like the day Charlie was shot. And my, through tears, through fighting tears, I basically my reaction was like, I just felt so indicted by the way Charlie led his life with such integrity and with such passion, that, it made me feel like Robert the Bruce in Braveheart when he said, "I don't want to lose heart." And you had Braveheart, you had William Wallace out there, like leading this movement, putting his life on the line, willing to sacrifice anything for freedom and going out there. And Robert the Bruce was playing the politics game. He was trying to be savvy. He was trying to, whatever. And, it just, you can see it eating at him throughout the movie, and it just culminates in that moment. And I felt like him. I was like, dude, I feel like I've been, like this is my first video in months, and I'll just, open up with you guys because I don't care. My wife and I were pregnant after 2 years of trying, and we ended up losing our baby at 20 weeks in the most just unimaginably difficult way. We were on vacation and had to come back in an emergency to try to save the baby. And when we found out something was wrong, and we lost her, we lost Scarlett, and she was actually supposed to be due this week. So anyway, since when that happened, I mean, obviously it was just like the most devastating thing I've ever been through. And that's the biggest reason why I haven't made any videos in the last 6 months. And it's just been a tough year. Amala also went through some of her own stuff that she made a video about earlier this year involving like a stalker situation. So she took over a month off, and I was dealing with what I was dealing with. And there's just so much darkness. And, I was finally kind of coming out of it a little bit, or feeling like getting back to normal, and this Charlie thing happened. But, I had, when something like that happens, like obviously it was a lot of grieving and processing, and I've been going through that, and I'm still going through it. But one of the things I struggled with was just this feeling of like, it's associated with depression, of just like aimlessness, and like everything just feels pointless. Like I remember thinking like, I have a headache, but I can take Tylenol or take ibuprofen or not take it. Either way, like it doesn't compare to the pain I'm feeling inwardly. So what's the difference? Like that's kind of where my mind and heart was at. And so when it came to like, oh, I'm going to go out and, change the world, or make videos and try to, influence people, like, oh, it's just like, I don't know what the heck am I going to say to people, right now. And so that's kind of been just where I'm at. I've been, knocked down and on the mat, and just wasn't really, it's not that every day I've been wallowing. I have been praying. I have been processing. I have been participating in community and all that stuff. But just like on a deep level, I just was not, in a place where I felt ready to engage and, try to use my gifts, or, whatever. Just, I was just not there. And, but yeah, I guess just seeing Charlie like pay the ultimate price for, fighting for what he believed in. And like I said before, just the way his story kind of echoed Christ, leaving the comfort of heaven and not being content to sit there in equality with God, but instead chose to come down and make himself nothing, and, humble himself and take the nature of a servant and a slave and death. That's an inspiring thing. And it's an indictment on me. Cause like, yeah, I'm having a pity party for myself, and, rightly so. It's not that my reasons aren't valid, but, that suffering didn't stop Christ from doing his mission. And like, the grind, the difficulty, like Charlie was constantly traveling and leaving his family and doing all kinds of things. Like, he's just a great example of someone who was just relentlessly, trying to live out his purpose and live out the gospel. And I just felt so an indictment of like, dude, I can sit here and wallow, or I can like, try to fulfill the purpose of God in my generation and do what I'm supposed to do. And I'd rather go out flaming out because of that than like, just withering away in sorrow and anger at the world or whatever. So that was honestly my personal response. Was just it was just like a wake up call for me to like, not necessarily, and not that it's invalidating of my grief or pain or anything like that, but just like, at some point, it's like when David was praying to save his child, and it said like, he refused to eat for weeks, and his people were like, you got to eat, man. And he was like, no, and then the baby died, and it said like later he got up and washed and put on, oil and everything. And then he said, and they were marveling at him, and he's like, well, I thought when the baby was still here, I thought perhaps the Lord would save him, but he didn't. So now I have to get up. I have to go and keep living, living my life. And I feel like, that's easier said than done, but it's ultimately true. And anyway, so that's a long, very deeply personal answer, but that's kind of my personal response. So, and the second part of your question, as far as like what people should do, what's my encouragement to people in the wake of it? I mean, just, I don't know, just follow that feeling of what if not, don't follow the political impulses, don't follow the people trying to leverage this into to funnel you into their movement or their but follow the sincere feeling of like, if you're moved in your heart by what happened to Charlie, or by the way he lived his life, or by this whole story, or by what's going on in the country right now, like, investigate and pursue that feeling and bring it before God, and bring it, reflect on it as deeply as you can, and really ask yourself, like, what is, what am I supposed to do in the midst of all this? What is my purpose? What is the right, way to direct my energy and in response to this? And, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? Do I want to be like the people who are trying to, like, the vultures who are coming in and trying to take the energy that's behind Charlie's legacy right now and funnel it to their own purposes? Or am I going to, actually do what Charlie did, which is not merely like be a MAGA person, but somebody who patterns your life after Jesus Christ, makes the advancing of the gospel the deepest thing, prioritizing, embodying Christ-likeness in your own life, and then letting everything flow from that. And however that might flow out of your politics in a conservative way, it might flow out of your politics in a way that looks more progressive or liberal or whatever. And we need both. We need everything. We need Christians who are genuinely knowing Jesus Christ and letting that spill out into whatever else they're doing in their life. And that, to me, is what Charlie did and exemplified. And he happened to be somebody where his relationship with Jesus spilled out into his MAGA beliefs, into his political activism on the right. But I don't think that that's the only way or the right way. I think the right way is pursue Jesus, let him transform you, and be a witness. And I think that was the biggest challenge to me, was like, Charlie died as a witness to Jesus, and he did what he was supposed to do. He lived his life well, and he went out, with his integrity intact and with his testimony intact. And look at his legacy already in just 31 years. And it's like, man, I want to have my loves ordered properly. I want to have, and I don't want to hold back. I don't want to, just be content with like, okay, well, I'm a Christian. I got my relationship with God right. I got this comfortable life, and blah, blah, blah. Like, I want to, really be poured out like an offering. Like Paul said, if my life's poured out like an offering on the altar of your faith, like that, it's worth it. It's worth it. And especially after the grief I've been through this year, it's like, dude, what are you going to threaten me with? Hell, I get to go see my daughter. Like, I mean, not hell, death. No, you can't. But I get to go see, like, if I'm going to see her faster, like, I saw a lot of reactions, interestingly, from like, people who are non-religious mainly, but who were like reacting in fear and saying like, well, I'm never going to go to a public event and speak. Like, look what they're going to do to us. And I'm like, dude, no, this should embolden you to, the dumbest thing they can do is kill you, because it just proves you right. And it makes you even more effective. And like, if that's the way I'm going to go out because I'm doing the good and doing the right thing, and like, then take me out, dude. I'm not afraid of that. Like, I mean, obviously there's like an element of fear that's just natural to every human, but like, at the end of the day, what an honor to, Charlie's a hero for that, in my opinion. And it inspires me to just, not be Robert the Bruce, cowering and playing politics and trying to maintain, trying to hedge against, this or that, or be comfortable, but really to just go out there and be engaged in the field, whatever that looks like for you, and giving it 100%.
Yeah. There are three ideas, really three scriptures that come to my mind when something like this happens. And, part of, I was texting when I was messaging you about, you were sending me, people talking about, the transformation this is about to bring, the revival, the renewal, all this stuff. And again, you weren't sending any of that to me because you were like, yeah, I believe in this. It's just more like, hey, what do you think about this? Have you seen this? Give me your thoughts. Saying. And Yeah, exactly. This is what people are saying. What do you think about what people are saying? So, with my experience, it's no longer the church context or the church ecosystem I'm currently in. But since the roots of my church background, it's very much filled with kind of this like charismatic evangelical megachurch expression. My whole Christian ecosystem, like for years, for over a decade, was massive gatherings, big revival, thousands and thousands of people gathered in a building. God is moving. The gospel's being preached. Worship is going up. We're never going to be the same ever again. We're going to go change the world. We need to go take our schools for Jesus. We're going to take our cities for Jesus. It was ongoing. It was constant. It was happening on a regular basis. And I do think there's a lot of unique qualities of what happened with this. And the last thing I want to do, again, this is just for me, like vulnerable. Let's just process, because I also don't think we need to be like a Debbie Downer or like anticipate that this won't amount to anything. Like I saw somebody tweet after all this happened, somebody tweeted, and this person who tweeted this like is a conservative Christian and is outspoken in the conservative Christian movement. So it's not like they were trying to talk down on conservatives or Republicans. Like they were saying, hey, as one of us, he tweeted like soon after the memorial service, he said, I can't wait to see how Republicans mess this up, or like how conservatives like fumble this. And now I have to admit, there's a huge part of me that's like, I resonate with that. Like, I so agree with that. But also I've just come to a point in my life where I'm much more like, hey, like, let's just take the W for now. Like, let's just take the W. Let's just sit in the W. Like, we'll have time to figure some stuff out. But since I am treating this more like a little bit more of like a vulnerable processing, I guess I'll play a few more of my cards. So this makes me think of situations like this, like I was saying earlier, it makes me think of three passages. One of the passages is in Proverbs. I'm not going to give the exact reference, so you guys can just ask ChatGPT or Grok, just figure out where they are, run a Google search if you're old school. But one of them is in Proverbs. It says, zeal without wisdom is not good. Haste makes mistakes. So that's this one, because usually when things like this happen, what gets triggered, it's like all like this rocket fuel. It's all this like this energy, this excitement, this we need to go do something. Look what happened. We need to go make a change. And I think all of that fuel and that energy is good. But if that zeal is not coupled with wisdom, it can cause way more damage than it can bring growth and like progress in moving forward. And I'm going to be so contextually on point with this. I'm even going to quote our saint Charlie Kirk himself, joking with the whole saint thing. But Charlie, there's like this clip that was going around. I'm sure you've seen it. It was popular. His wife Erica would ask him like, "What's your wisdom for today? What's your wisdom for today?" And he would just say like random stuff. Sometimes it was like just super nerdy and silly. Other times it was like really insightful and great, and so on and so forth. But one of the things he said, and it was like a silly one, but it was like, that was silly, but was good. He said something along the lines of, speed is pointless, or moving quickly doesn't matter if you're going in the wrong direction. Yeah. And I think if we just allow this, because I think what happens for some people when things like this take place, there's such a zeal that gets like started. But if you don't take a moment to reflect on the direction your passions are oriented toward, you can just end up taking off in a wrong direction. And so anytime something like this happens, I think we need to take a moment and think about the direction our passions are aiming us to make sure that the direction is good. Because if it's not, then we can just use all of this zeal to end up causing more destruction. And look, obviously I don't mean destruction in the sense of like obviously there was like no big riots and, things like that. All that's good. I mean destruction in the sense of not aligning your actions with the ways and the will of God, because there's what God wants us to do as far as what we are to accomplish, but then there's also a way in which we are to go about accomplishing the thing. So not just doing what God wants us to do, but having his character and his likeness in the way in which we have that thing done. So I think one, again, I'm perfect. I want to talk to more of the Christian audience right now. I think one is it's us orienting ourselves properly around a right view of Jesus and a right view of his mission and a right view of his passion. And the more we can better understand who Christ is, what it is that he was accomplishing, that he wants us to continue to accomplishing, the way in which he was going about that, I think that sets us up in a better direction. So that's the first one. Haste makes mistakes. Zeal without knowledge. Zeal without knowledge is not good. That said, the other thing that I think, though, is there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says that the farmer who waits for there to be no clouds in the sky will never reap a harvest. So I also think that we can get so like into our own heads and analyzing our passions and what we do and how we should approach it and how can we be most strategic to leverage this for the greatest impact, and how you can then fall into that trap where you are getting so long processing what happened and being strategic with how to respond that you end up doing nothing because like you're waiting for all of the perfect conditions, right? That's what that verse in Ecclesiastes is getting at. Like you have a farmer, he's waiting to begin his work, but he's waiting for the perfect conditions in the sky before he begins anything. And so what Ecclesiastes is saying is like, look, if you're always waiting for the perfect conditions to get to work, you're never going to get to work because there's always going to be a reason to not do something. There's always going to be a situation that's not ideal, a circumstance that's not ideal. There's always going to be something you don't have quite figured out yet. So you need to be willing just to get out there, start doing something and learn along the way and take the L's with the W's, and it's okay to fumble. So to another extent, it's fine if like I am blown away at how pristine. I mean, that's the only word I can think of. Pristine conservative Christians were after Charlie Kirk's assassination. Like, I mean, the response was nothing but like vigils, prayer meetings, worship services. Like it just like, I mean, it was just immaculate. I thought, at least one building's going to get set on fire. I thought like at least one person was going to get beat up, but it just was like, it was pristine, right? How the reaction, I think that's so great. But that said, I think it's okay if from this point on, I'm not saying it's okay if like, a Christian goes and kills somebody or anything, but I think it's fine if there are some fumbles, if we do make some mistakes, if we do get too zealous in this direction as opposed to that one. Like that's just a part of that process. Like there's going to be a little bit of a mess that gets created as we try to figure out what this looks like. So I do want to put a little bit towards like, yes, on one sense, hey, let's step back, let's be wise, and let's make wise decisions and not just go charge off in our zealousy. At the same time, let's not get so critical that if someone gets a little extreme or goes a little too hard in the paint, all of a sudden, oh, you screwed it all up, right? Like we've lost all the momentum. So there's that side of it as well. And then the final verse that, comes to my mind, it talks about how, and this kind of goes in with the first one, but when Jesus in the Gospels is talking about the seed, and then there's the different types of soil. There's the seed that falls on the ground, but the ground is shallow. And so the seed sprouts up quickly. But the moment the sun comes out, which the sun is supposed to help aid in the growth and the life and the energy of the plant and the development of the seed, that's what the sun is supposed to do. But because that plant did not take deep roots, what ended up happening was it didn't have a source of moisture to pull from. So when the sun came out, it scorches the plant, it scorches the seed, the seed dies. However, there's the seed that falls on good ground. So that means that under that initial topsoil, there is even more soil for those roots to go down into. So that way, when the sun comes up, the plant continues to grow, it continues to flourish, it continues to build deep roots, and it continues to produce the fruit and the leaves and the foliage that it was intended to produce. And so I think for, everyone, I think there's just like, hey, there's deep work that needs to be done, because every opportunity for us is a chance to look at ourselves and to say like, okay, how can this is kind of that deep work that needs to happen. Look, dude, I'm all for revival. I'm all for changing the world. I'm all for let's have a positive impact. I'm all for, there are some, evil, destructive, demonic powers and principalities and ideas and things that are like contaminating our world. But on one level, when I think about that hard stuff that has to come out, we have to recognize, and this is such a topic that Christians some conservative Christians can push against, some Christians can just push against, because they are so over the like soft-handed, mamby-pamby, overly gentle, feminized Jesus. And I totally get that. Like, I completely understand that Jesus was not a feminized, passive, walk all over him. He's just running around giving hugs and kisses and, talked with like a little soft voice. That said, as someone who wants to be bold in their faith, just like Charlie was, who does not want to hedge on what they believe, like Charlie did not hedge on what he believed, we cannot let go of the fact that what drives Christ is a deep love for his enemies and a deep love for those that hated him and a love for those he wanted to save and rescue. And so I think that deep work, if we are motivated to like, yeah, I'm not going to be violent towards the other side. I'm not going to shoot the other side. I'm not going to punch the other side. But ultimately, you like want to see them like lose, and you want to gloat in that, and you want to be like, yeah, we won, this movement won and you lost, and I want to throw that in your face. Like, is the thing that's motivating you a sense of God's love for your people, this country, fellow citizens, those that disagree with you? Is that seed going to go down deep? Because I feel as though what motivated Charlie was like a love for these hyper liberal, progressive, non-Christian lost students and people that were deceived. Like Jesus says, he looks at the crowds and he sees his heart's broken. He's moved with compassion, because when he saw the crowds, they were like sheep without a shepherd, and they were confused and they were lost. And so again, I'm not saying we shouldn't hate certain ideologies and certain things should not anger us. And there are clearly people that are being more used by demonic and evil, powers than others. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with voicing that. Jesus had very sharp words with the Pharisees and sometimes the Sadducees. Jesus even had sharp words with other Jews. That's one of the things that drives me crazy. People talk about how like Jesus was, he was like, savage and more ruthless when it came to the religious leaders. It's like, yeah, he was to the Jews as well. Just like the everyday Jew. Whenever he says, you are like your father, Satan, he says that to just Jewish people. Like, he's not saying that to the Pharisees. There's a crowd of just everyday common Jewish people around him. And they're like, we're like our father Abraham. And he's like, Abraham's not your father. Your father's the devil, right? And so it's like he talked that way to all kinds of people. So again, I'm not saying, he tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. So not that we cannot have a hatred for that which is evil and wrong and bad. And, right. Not that we shouldn't care about that stuff. But I do think there's this deep work that we need to do where we are driven and motivated by God's love, not just God's love for Christians and God's love for the church and God's love for our side, God's love for all of humanity, the whole world, every single person. That needs to be, the thing that's motivating us. So those are the three things that, kind of just came to my mind initially as I just reflected on where we are in this cultural moment.
Yeah. So, a lot there, but just as you're talking, laying out each one, the scripture popped in my mind is to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, because when our eyes are on Jesus, then we're not moving fast in the wrong direction. We're moving, he's the bright and morning star. He's the, going to point us in the direction we need to go, and we're not going to be moving, wrongly. And when our eyes are fixed on Jesus, he's the soil that's deep enough that, we're not pulling people into our movement. We're not pulling people into, something that's merely political or something that's merely of a human of our own, the latest church box that we're trying to fit people in. If we can connect them to him, then he is the soil in which they can flourish, and we need to ground ourselves in him as well. And Jesus is also, the perfect balance of love and justice and truth. And, another thing that's come up since, maybe we can get into this a little bit, but like people are talking about how Tim Keller, who's a huge hero of mine and probably someone I've listened to more of their sermons than anybody else, and his book on suffering was the most helpful thing for me going through losing Scarlett this year. But people are kind of trashing him right now and saying that, well, he wanted to try this more loving, moderate, third way where you're not left, you're not right, you're just in the middle, and that's how to reach people in love. And I don't think it's one thing or the other. I think what Keller did was what God prompted him to do, and it bore a ton of fruit. Now, did he overstep maybe in prescribing that to all of Christianity? Maybe, but like, I don't think he was really trying to make it an exclusive thing. I think he was just kind of saying, hey, from my vantage point, here's what worked for me, and here's how I kind of think we can go about evangelizing the world. And he took this much more moderate intellectual approach, and not, getting bogged down in either political extreme, but taking the middle. And I think that's fine. But Charlie represents, what obedience to God looks like in a different life that happens to, manifest in a different way. And does that mean everyone needs to be like Charlie? No. And so the common denominator is be rooted and grounded in Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. And as he perfects and authors your faith, then you're going to bear the fruit that is actually of Christ, that actually remains. It's going to be seed that falls on good ground. It's going to be gold, silver, and precious stones, and not wood, hay, and stubble that's burned up in eternity. Because whatever is coming out of, what's born of flesh is flesh, what's born of spirit is spirit. Whatever comes out of your own, ideas, what your own human conceptions of what needs to happen right now, or, your own human, reducing God into your box, that's going to be burnt up. It's not eternal. But whatever comes out of the overflow of you properly ordering your loves and properly, submitting your life to Jesus Christ, knowing him, patterning your life after him, becoming Christ-like, and letting that Christ-likeness inform your decisions, inform your motivations, inform how you treat other people, inform your zeal for truth and whatnot. That is the answer. Christ is the answer. And we can cut up a million different ways and look at a million different examples of how different people have done that. And you'll be able to find people who are progressive and left-leaning who brought mass sweeping change into the world. You'll be able to find people who were right-leaning and did the same, and you'll find people in the middle. But the common denominator is, are you well done, thy good and faithful servant? Did you pattern your life after Jesus Christ? Or were you a faithful witness to him? Did you pursue knowing him? And did everything else go beyond that? That was what I think, Charlie's legacy is so powerful, because even though he was so prominent, a political figure, and got involved in those discussions, like his personal relationship with Christ, and that being the underlying motivation of his heart, outshone all of that in his life. And that should be true of all of us as Christians. And I think that's, again, where to focus our energy. One of my favorite, I just can't escape this axiom that Jesus gave of like, be wise as servants, but innocence as doves. And like, that's so captures the duality of like, because that's living with wisdom. That's appropriately applying, truth and navigating life in a way that we ought to, if we understood everything as good as God did. And that is, be wise as serpents. Don't be naive, but also be innocent as doves. Be totally like loving and have innocence with regard to your motives toward other people, and don't presume bad motives. Don't trust in your own strength. All those things, and it's like Jesus again embodies that. And I think he's the anchor that is heavy enough to keep us from going off course, to keep us from being blown away by the latest flashy thing that's going to be, this is going to be the revival, let's chase this over here, or the most devastating thing that can knock us off our rocker, like Charlie's assassination, like what I experienced earlier this year with losing my baby. Jesus' anchor is the thing that is deep enough to hold us on course. And I think as we fix our eyes on him, like that's the only answer, man. I think that's the only answer. And I don't know what that looks like, in particular, and that's for every person to kind of navigate for themselves. But like, if you do that, you will not go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's crazy to me. And I told you this whenever you sent me, somebody, Tim Keller was wrong. My thing is like, he totally could be wrong. Like, easily, when it comes to the context of like what's going to usher in this next renewal, so to speak, in the United States of America, which is the context that Keller was writing this. But to me, the audacity to think that you could judge that right now, like how do you
and with such
know?
vitriol,
So I
too.
think Exactly. So that's what I was going to say. So this is me just, 100% talking to you like a bro. We are on the phone. The attitude of dunking on Keller pisses me off, bro. It just drives me crazy. Like, if you, Taylor, I know you know me, I am all for critiquing people and pointing out where they're wrong and not idolizing
And the
anyone
church and
and
church
looking
leaders.
for the flaws. Exactly. Like, there is not one single church leader Christian that I don't go, well, I would actually, and that doesn't mean I'm right, but it just means like I am fine. Like, I do not think we should idolize a single Christian man of God, Tim Keller, Charlie Kirk, like none of them. It is all open for critique. But this like this dunking thing, this this thing of like hating on Keller is so cool within certain pockets of like conservative Christendom. It drives me crazy, bro. I hate it. So all that being said, to think that like, and again, I think it's just simply because I've been around the block long enough. And I'm only saying that as a 35-year-old man, but like I've been a part of these movements that like were so radical and they were impacting so many people that if you just looked at the first year of compare, or even just people, like with me working on staff at a church, with me being very involved in vocational ministry, I've seen ministries and people that if you just judge the sprint, if you just judge the first 3 months of their existence, then you would say, oh, these are way more fruitful than, this person over here who is trying to take it more slow and trying to understand both sides and trying to be more nuanced and trying to blah, 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 blah. Over the course of 3 months, yeah, this person, this individual, this ministry is destroying that thing over there. Mm-hmm. But then you zoom out over 5 years and these zealous, on fire for God, bold in their faith, not afraid to be persecuted, have damaged more people, have burned themselves out, aren't even really walking with God anymore, never had deep roots, where this person who, again, was more nuanced, trying to understand both sides, made a couple mistakes, maybe leaned a little too far left one time, leaned a little far too right sometime. But you know what they did? What Jesus said should happen in the Gospels, he said, over time, this plant, this seed that fell into good ground, over time, it produced a harvest 30, 60, 100 fold. And so I am not saying what is happening. Like, again, Keller could literally just be wrong. Like, God could literally use the MAGA movement to usher in the third great awakening. The Spirit of God could fall on Donald Trump today. And that man can and again, we could just lead America into some of the greatest, holiest, amazing, most prosperous years we've ever encountered. So Keller could 100% be wrong. But we can't know that right now. Yeah. And also, while Charlie's impact is obviously so big, we're still looking at a small segment of the broader political landscape and Christian landscape. Because some of the stuff Keller was talking about in this whole article he wrote, talking about like the different zones. So one, like looking at like Charlie's memorial service. Again, a lot of people, but 100,000 people compared to the millions of Christians that actually vote. It's a subsegment, dude. And a lot of those Christians, just because they were at Charlie's memorial service, even the broader Christendom, okay, well, the question is, how many of them are staunchly as pro-life as Charlie? We don't know. How many of them would be, stand on 10 toes with the Bible's the inerrant word of God and it's, and our fundamentalists? We don't know. It's possible that 2 weeks from now, you can pull someone who is at Charlie's service and put a microphone in their face and say, hey, what's your view on abortion? And they go, well, I just feel like outlawing it is a little too strict. Maybe we should keep the ban at like 18 weeks or 16 weeks or something like that. You just don't know, right? And so it's easy for us to impute on all of conservative Christendom that they're like all these hyper MAGA and that's what's going to drive this renewal. But my whole point is that, like, number one, time-wise, you can't know. And then number two, sample size, you just can't know. Because I still think Keller is right in that, in the fact that, or I think it's likely that Keller could be right in the sense of even the vast majority of people that I think do consider themselves believers and even vote conservatively. I do think a lot of them do fall into like that zone 2B that, he talks about. And again, I know if you're listening, you may have no idea what we're talking about. So forgive me for referencing some of that article and stuff. You can, maybe I'll send Taylor the link to throw it in the description. You can look at all that stuff like that. I don't want to turn this to like a arguing for or against Keller, but that's broad. That's more broadly my point, is that we don't know the fruit of all of this yet. And we don't know the impact of all of this yet. And I hope, I would want anything to bring that revival, that renewal, that awakening. Again, I am taking the W for what it is, and I think we should sit in that. But yeah, to try to like use to try to say what this is going to lead to, because I could see this now shifting the conversation. I could see this leading into it going too far to one side, and we do get to a point where the Christian movement becomes synonymous with a purely politically driven movement. And then you have bad actors that try to ride that wave, and they want to push certain ideologies regarding a like capital C, capital N Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. They want to move things towards like an ethnocentric monoculture. They want to establish more of a monarchy. And now, do I think any of that stuff actually has like a threat of impacting America? No, America's too diverse. It's too big. There's too many people, and even too many Christians that will push against it. But again, I don't think that we're at a place where we can actually judge the long-term impact of this and what it really leads to. Because we're just too early. I am hopeful. I would love for Keller to be wrong, and I would love for this to be the beginning of a great renewal and awakening. I'm not against it, but yeah, it's just too naive. And so I think that anytime God is up to something, the devil also is waiting to see how he can hijack things, how he can twist things and turn things, how he can tempt things. And he has been, in the short term, of course, all under God's sovereignty, he's been successful in hijacking things of God, Now, again, God comes back in. God uses all for his good. God is sovereign. He oversees everything. Nothing is happening outside of his will, his control, his sovereignty, his justice, his mercy, his love, his goodness. But yeah, it's very naive to just think that, because a lot of people got together, they're Christians, they, said the gospel, and, there's all this excitement. Yes, this is the move of God that we've been looking for. This is the moment that's going to bring the change that we've been wanting to see. I mean, dear God, bro, we were supposed to have the rapture yesterday, and that didn't happen, so, hey, who are we to say what's going to happen from here?
Yeah, man. We're coming up on an hour here, so I think I'll share my final thoughts. But one thing that's like been driven home to me this year is just the reality of the wheat and the tares, and like the fact that good and bad grow up together in this fallen world, and whether that's in revival movements, whether that's in your local church, and whether that's in your personal life, like there, good and bad both exist, and ultimately, part of an underrated hope of being a Christian is the idea of judgment, and the idea of at the end of all things, at the end of there will be a final, justice will be served to Charlie's killer. There will be justice that'll be restored for like the loss of my baby that feels so unjust. There, like all things will be as they should, and God will wipe every tear, and everything sad will become untrue, as Sam said in Lord of the Rings. But in the meantime, we're in a fallen world that is wheat and tares, and like every Christian leader's motivations have wheat and they have tares. They have the real thing and they have weeds. And every movement, political movement, every revival movement is going to have wheat and it's going to have tares. And it's for God at the end of all things to like separate. That is what Jesus says in the parable, that God, in the end separates at the harvest time. But in the meantime, we let them grow when we, and it's not that we like tolerate evil or wrong where we see it. I think, we have to be faithful stewards in our own lives and till the gardens of our own hearts as well as we can. But it's not really for us to judge, the purity of one man's work or another's. That's for God's. And if there's something we see and the Spirit is prompting us to, take active role in speaking against something, then, do that under, but in the fear of the Lord, and hopefully, subjecting that to scripture and your own humility, and that's coming out of your relationship with God. But like, I think that's the other part of my takeaway is that there's wheat and tares. And then there's also like for the fruit of my life to have any actual value, it has to be an overflow of Christ's work in transforming me. And so anything I do for God or in God's name, whether that's trying to build a political movement, whether that's trying to usher in a revival, whether that's trying to live my life as a Christian, whether that's trying to, progress society to be better, anything I do in God's name that is of my human conception and effort is worthless. And to your point earlier, it's going to end up doing more harm than good, because what's born of flesh is flesh, what's born of spirit is spirit. But what I do that is an overflow of God's work in me, Christ's work in me, which, by the way, usually is forged in the furnace of suffering and going through difficult things, and, not following your flesh and not following your own wisdom and not following your own abilities, but God forming and forging his character in your heart. Whatever comes out of that, that's going to be worthwhile and eternal. And that is the fruit that remains, the seed that actually bears fruit. And everything else is like, it's going to be ugly. It's going to be a mess. We're in this fallen world.
Yep.
We're human. Like you're talking about the devil, hijacking our movements. Sometimes you don't even need to, because we're human and we fumble the bag on our own. So like, and I'm just, as, I'm raising my hand as the first one that is guilty of such things. So I'm just like, dude, things are going to be what they are. I don't know if we're in the midst of revival. I'm like, in a sense, I don't care. Like I care because I want to see God move in my generation. I want things to happen. And that's kind of how I feel ultimately about this Charlie thing. The assassination and the memorial service and everything that's happening right now. It's like, let it be what it is. It was a tragedy, but there was so much beauty that came through it, and we can let that be what it is and try to absorb the impact, in the fear of God as much as we can, and, reflect on ourselves and how to carry that forward and how to be like Jesus in our own lives. And like, let's let that be what it is. It doesn't have to, we don't have to latch all these new things onto it and put our hope in this thing being the catalyst for XYZ. It's like, no, today I have to get up and walk out my faith. And today I have to get up and fix my eyes on Jesus and let him transform me, and let that transformation bleed into how I live my life and how I make my choices on who I'm going to date, what I'm going to do for a career, how I'm going to interact with people on a daily basis, what I'm going to say online. Like that is the takeaway for me. And there is basically nothing else. And whether people start running with this in one direction or another, like it's going to happen because we're human and things are going to go crazy, and people are not going to form the perfect church. They're not going to form the perfect government this side of eternity. But what we can do is try to live faithfully in our own lives. And then, and as you're doing that, as Charlie did, like, you try to live faithfully in your life, and then that might manifest in being connected to political activism in one arena or another, saying things online in one way or another. But like at the end of the day, what should bleed through and what should, when people dig down to the bottom of what you're really about, should be coming out of Christ-like, they should find Christ-likeness when they dig past all your motivations. So that's my final prescription. Tay, what are your final closing words?
Yeah, man, my final words, my encouragement is to, you have for doing the will of God, you have to be rooted in Christ. And so my encouragement with people in the context of what we are saying, I am perfectly fine. And I understand. And I think these are opportunities that God gives us to see through someone, but to Jesus. And I'm not just trying to say that to sound like preachery. I just think that's the correct language to use. And it just so happens that they rhyme. But it's to see through, to get to, because I think some people in the midst of their zeal of what has happened, it's almost as if they want to do things like for the sake of Charlie, in the name of Charlie, for the death of Charlie. And it's like, if you root your obedience to God in the death of Charlie, number one, Charlie wouldn't want you to do that. Yeah. But then number two, Charlie's death does not have the supernatural grace required to carry out the will of God. It is not sufficient to do that. It can't. It doesn't have the ability. The life of Charlie does not have the grace in it for you to be connected to carry you into whatever God is calling you to do. His life, his death is insufficient to carry you through to accomplish not just the will of God, but to become the person who God wants you to be. It's not in it, but you can see through it, kind of like you were saying, Taylor. It's like, I'm not trying to say Charlie is Christ, but Charlie's death is a window that I can look through to see the death of Christ. Mm-hmm. It's a window. I can see, oh my gosh, here is someone who was killed because he was trying to reach the people that hated him, but he loved them. He's come to proclaim truth to them, and it's by the hands of those people that he was killed and displayed in front of thousands to see. And some wept over it, but others mocked it. And it's like, but to not sit in that, because again, that's going to lose. It's going to lose its ability. So to see through that stuff and then to say, so wow, what must it be like for Christ, for God? What was it like for the disciples? What was it like, for Christ to hang before them, to be pierced? Like we just saw Charlie was pierced. Like to let this be a window, because that is what's going to sustain you. That is what's going to carry you. It's letting this be a window to Jesus, to let Jesus change you, transform you. And in the same way that like we're using Charlie as like this example in this model, right? To where like, let's say if someone's like was so moved by Charlie's death that they went to a college campus and started like, again, physically trying to fight people that were liberals. What would someone say if that person goes, I'm doing this because of what happened to Charlie? What immediately people would say is they would say, hey bro, but like Charlie didn't do this and Charlie wouldn't want you. This isn't how Charlie went about it. That's exactly what we should say about Jesus, because the goal of this, now if God directs you, orients you to a life and an application that's similar to what Charlie did and the way in which he did it, amen. Follow that. Don't be fearful. Like, do it. If he's using Charlie's life as a model for you to follow, lean into that. You don't have to feel ashamed of that. It doesn't have to look different. But at the same time, it doesn't have to look like the way Charlie did it either. And so you want to look at the life of Jesus. So in the same way, people are watching clips of Charlie to look at how he talked to people, how he engaged with people, read the Gospels to see how Jesus talked to people, to see how Jesus, because every movement wants to hijack Jesus. The far right movements want to hijack Jesus. The far left want to hijack Jesus. The progressive center left want to hijack Jesus. The center right want to hijack Jesus. The I'm independent third wayism wants to hijack Jesus. Everybody wants to hijack Jesus for their movement. Let Jesus be who Jesus is. And the best opportunity you have is first and foremost, go to the Gospels, just look at the dude's life, and then spend time with him. That's how you be like Jesus. And then the final thing I'll say is, look, I'm all for saving our nation. I'm all for saving our cities. I'm all for saving our states. I have children. I have a stake in that. Like, I believe in that. But the last thing I want to say, Proverbs talks about greater is the man who can conquer himself than the one who can take a city. And God is always primarily after who you are more than what you do. Yeah. So again, please go change the world. But it is like an echo of what Charlie said. Charlie wasn't like, so go change the world. Charlie was like, so get married and have children and like work a good job and raise them with good values. Yeah, and go to church and like that was like the application. So my application for all of you like zealous young men out there, overcome your pride, overcome your selfishness, overcome your self-dependence, overcome your addictions to lust, maybe pornography, sleeping with your girlfriend, overcome those things, overcome your alcoholism, overcome your party lifestyles. To the young women, overcome your promiscuity, overcome your attitudes, overcome your selfishness, overcome your insecurities. Like, that is how we take the world. Now, again, there is practical application. There is voting. There is starting organizations. There is getting involved in your neighborhood, in your community. Like I'm not saying just do one and not the other. But if you get involved in all this activism, but you are neglecting the work that the Spirit of God is wanting to do to transform who you are, you're going to miss it. So that's my encouragement to people, is see through what happened to Charlie to Christ, be rooted and anchored in Jesus. And the practical application is not just to think that and to feel good about it as, wow, that's a great thought. open the Bible to the Gospels and look at the life of Christ and spend time talking to and with Jesus Christ. Read books about Jesus, watch talks about Jesus, not listen to these political or this theological or this ideological talk about Christ and their view of him and how they think. No, just try to get just in the context and the content of who Christ is. Follow that, and then let that thing impact who you are. Overcome the darkness inside of you, so that as you go through life and you are getting involved in the, your children's school or your school, and you're starting organizations, and maybe you signed up to start a TPUSA chapter and you're about to join it. And what people need are individuals that look like Jesus and act like Jesus and talk like Jesus and are conformed into the image of Jesus. So pursue those things, and I think we will, whether this leads to revival or renewal, I don't know, but will it lead to a society that is closer to the kingdom of God? Yes. And that's what I want. All I want is for our world to be closer to what God's kingdom looks like, closer to God's will. And that's all I want to happen. So will it push it all the way through where we look back 5 years from now and the world is totally different? Or will it just be incrementally better? I don't know. But as long as we're doing our part to just move it closer to your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then we're winning. And to me, that's what's most important. So those are my final words.
There you go, guys. Well, we'd love to continue the conversation with y'all. So if you want to drop your thoughts in the comments or hit me up on Twitter or Instagram with DM or tweet at me, whatever, I'd be happy to keep the conversation going, hear your thoughts. And Tay, where can they find you?
Yeah, same thing. Obviously the thing I'm still, probably spend the most time doing is my gaming channel. But yeah, so you guys can check me out on my gaming channel. I live stream. Look, let's talk about this while I'm live streaming. I live stream almost every day with gaming stuff, but also I make some gaming content. So that's shown in Disciple. Taylor will put that in the description, but also I have an Instagram account. That's just at TayGovernor, TAHEGOVERNOR. I also have an X account that only has 31 followers. But I'm on X every day. So shoot me a message on X. You can be my 35th follower and I will message you back, and let's talk, let's debate, let's have conversations. I'd love to connect with you guys through that as well.
All right, there you go, guys. I'll put some links in the description, and thanks for following along, and we'll see you next time.